What would you do if the man you loved stood silent while his father struck you? Boston in the winter doesn't whisper, it bites, the kind of cold that crawls past your coat and settles in your bones. I remember that night clearly because it didn't feel like winter, not at first. I stood on the marble steps of the Corwin mansion, its white stone facade gleaming under spotlights like some ancient temple to money and pride. Every window blazed with warm light, daring the city to look inside and see just how perfect they were. I pulled my coat tighter around me, took a breath I hoped was steady, and stepped into a world that never really welcomed me. The warmth hit me immediately, so did the sound. Classical music humming beneath the clink of crystal glasses. Laughter that felt practiced like a performance rehearsed 1,000 times. The Boston elite filled the grand room like characters out of a high society magazine. Slick hair-tailored dresses, eyes that scanned and dismissed in the same glance. I wasn't one of them. 3 years of marriage to Alaric Corwin had taught me exactly how to disappear in plain sight. I'd learned to smile without showing too much, to laugh softly at jokes that stung. I'd studied their language, the pauses, the half-smiles, the way they weaponized politeness like a dagger dipped in honey. And I was still invisible. Alaric stood across the room, flanking his father like a loyal shadow. Dorian Corwin, patriarch of the family empire, towered in both presence and ego. Tall, sleek, powerful, the kind of man who expected the world to orbit him. And my husband, a perfect mirror, though somehow colder. He didn't notice me walk in. He rarely did. I made small talk with a woman who once called my dress charming the way someone might praise a dog for sitting. She droned on about Aspen and Michelin-starred chefs. I nodded my eyes, drifting toward the massive dining hall where dinner was being served like a coronation ceremony. The table stretched endlessly, a gleaming mahogany beast draped in ivory linen and floral arrangements that cost more than my entire apartment. Every seat was a role, every fork a cue. This wasn't dinner, it was theater, and I was tired of acting. Still, I tried. I kept my head down, smiled at appropriate moments, even let out a soft chuckle when Dorian made a comment about imported discipline referring to the household staff. I bit the inside of my cheek and reminded myself, just get through the night. But you can't prepare for betrayal, not the kind that knocks the wind out of you and leaves you tasting blood. I was walking behind Dorian, balancing a glass of red wine and a dessert plate, trying to pass it to a guest without bumping into anyone. My heel snagged on the edge of the rug just a second, and the wine sloshed forward a splash landing square on his pristine white shirt. Time froze. The room went silent, and not the polite kind, the kind that wraps around your throat. Dorian turned slowly, the disgust on his face curling like smoke. Then, without hesitation, his fist connected with my cheek. I didn't even feel the pain at first, just shock, and then warmth. A metallic taste spread through my mouth, and I stumbled back, catching myself on the edge of the table. My hand flew to my cheek as blood dripped down my chin, dotting the marble floor in perfect, damning red. "You stupid maid," he growled, voice loud enough to echo. "Go wash my damn shirt." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. 50 people, 50 eyes, and not a single one blinked. Some looked away, some didn't, but no one stood up. I turned to Alaric, my husband, my partner, my shield, or so I thought. He didn't rush to me, didn't even look horrified. His expression was blank, frozen in something colder than shock. He didn't see a woman he loved bleeding. He saw an inconvenience. "Apologize to my father," he said like he was reading a line from a play, or "get out." Something inside me shattered, but not the way they expected. Not into tears, not into pleading, into silence. I grabbed a silk napkin from the table, dabbed the blood from my lip carefully, and straightened my spine. I didn't apologize. I didn't scream. I walked out. Each step echoed like a war drum across that marble floor. No one followed. No one stopped me. The cold hit me again outside. This time I welcomed it. I made it to my car, slid behind the wheel, hands shaking. The city blurred as I drove through frozen streets, headlights slicing through falling snow. At home, I kicked off my heels, dropped my coat on the floor, and collapsed on the edge of my bed. My phone buzzed beside me. I picked it up. 68 missed calls. Alaric, Dorian, over and over. A cyclone of their names. And a single text from Dorian. "You'll regret it if you talk." I stared at the screen blood still drying on my cheek. I thought I had escaped, but the real battle hadn't even started. The next morning, I woke to the pale gray light that always made Boston feel heavier. My head throbbed from the swelling near my cheekbone, but it wasn't just the pain that kept me still. It was the silence, thick, charged, the kind that comes before a storm. I hadn't cried. Not when he hit me. Not when my husband chose silence over me. And not even now, staring at my cracked reflection in the bathroom mirror, the faint outline of a bruise darkening across my cheek. But my body trembled like it was trying to catch up to the betrayal my mind already understood. I wrapped a scarf around my neck and jaw more for the cold than for modesty. I didn't want questions. I didn't have answers. When I stepped into my tiny kitchen, the place that used to feel like sanctuary now felt like a waiting room. My phone was still lit with notifications, calls, texts, emails, but I didn't touch it. I poured stale coffee into a chipped mug and stood in the window watching the snow begin to fall again. Light, almost mocking. Then the voicemail icon caught my eye. Just one. From Dorian. I shouldn't have listened. Every cell in my body told me not to, but my finger moved anyway. His voice spilled into the room, cold and smooth like polished stone. Colloquy. Accidents happen. But if you try to turn this into something, if you let that little outburst last night become more than it needs to be, you'll regret it. I have the best lawyers in Boston. Think very carefully. He said it so calmly, like he was commenting on the weather, like he hadn't cracked my lip in front of a ballroom of witnesses. Think carefully. I stared at the wall, at nothing. Then I opened the drawer by my desk. The notebook was still there, a plain spiral-bound thing I'd started months ago. At first, it was just thoughts, quiet rants I didn't dare speak aloud, but over time, it grew into something else, a record, an archive, of slights, of comments made at dinners, of emails never answered. Of that day, Dorian joked I was lucky to marry up. Of the time Alaric asked me to sign a post-nuptial amendment at dinner, sliding the document across the table like it was a dessert menu. I wrote it all down, page after page, memory after memory. Now, as I flipped through, I realized something. I wasn't just journaling. I was documenting, and maybe preparing. A chill slid down my spine, not from the cold, but from the sudden sharp clarity that this wasn't just about one night. This was years in the making. I just didn't want to see it until now. The phone buzzed again. A new message from Alaric, please. Let's fix this before it gets worse. I almost laughed. Fix this. Like I'd broken a glass, not bled on their marble floor. That's when another name popped up on my screen. Marjorie. I hadn't spoken to her in years. We used to work together back when I still had my own job before the Corwins encouraged me to focus on the family. She was an old mentor, a retired attorney with a sharp tongue and sharper instincts. Her message was short. If you need a lifeline, call me. Don't wait. That was all. But it was enough. I pulled my coat back on notebook tucked under one arm scarf tight against the wind and stepped outside. The city was unforgiving that day. Wind slicing through my sleeves, snow falling sideways. But I didn't stop. I didn't check my phone. I didn't flinch when the streetlights flickered overhead like warning signs. I found her at a small community legal clinic in Cambridge, one of those forgotten places squeezed between a nail salon and a tax office. The kind of place the Corwins would never set foot in. Marjorie sat behind a desk cluttered with papers and half-drunk tea. She looked up the moment I walked in. Her eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but recognition. She didn't say hello. She said, sit. So I did. And when I opened my mouth, the words came out faster than I expected. About the party, about the bruise, about the years of quiet cruelty, the dinners, the documents, the fear. She listened like a courtroom stenographer, but when I finally stopped, her words landed like a gavel. You're not overreacting. You're underreacting. I blinked. Excuse me, You've been gaslit so long you don't even realize how bad this is. He hit you in front of witnesses, and your husband told you to apologize. That's not a family. That's a power structure. And you're at the bottom of it. Something inside me cracked open. Not from grief, not from shock, from recognition. Marguerite leaned forward. You've got two choices, Calliope. You can shrink and vanish, or you can stand up, but you can't do both. I stared at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't want to shrink. I wanted to rise. She handed me a legal pad. Start writing. Names, dates, incidents, everything. I'll help, but you have to fight. I nodded, because I already knew the truth. If I didn't fight back, they'd erase me entirely, and I wasn't going to let that happen. Not anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, though fear was there humming quietly beneath everything, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying every moment I had let slide. Every insult, every cut disguised as tradition, every time I smiled through humiliation just to keep the peace. The silence in my apartment wasn't peaceful. It pulsed with everything unsaid. I sat cross-legged on the floor, papers spread out around me like a war map, my notebook, my calendar, emails. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. I named it, "In Case They Come After Me." And they would. I wasn't naive anymore. As I clicked through documents and saved screenshots, I saw it. An old email chain buried in my archives. Dorian's assistant had sent it months ago, something about transferring property to a new trust. It didn't seem important then, but now it looked like a shadow move. Like he'd been preparing for war before I even knew I was a target. I saved it. Then I heard it, my phone buzzing on the nightstand. Another call. Alaric, again. I didn't answer, but I let the voicemail roll through. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't slept either. Calliope, please, you're making this worse than it has to be. Just talk to my father. You know he didn't mean it like that. Don't throw everything away over a mistake. A mistake. I shut the phone off. There's a moment when someone shows you exactly who they are that you stop making excuses for them. This was that moment. The next morning, I called Marjorie. She picked up on the second ring. I'm ready, I said. She didn't ask for what, she just said, come in. Back at the clinic, she had a stack of documents waiting for me, restraining order templates, incident reports, affidavits. You need to file now, she said, before they get to the narrative. What do you mean, I asked. They're powerful Calliope. They've got lawyers who know how to spin a story. If we don't document first, they'll paint you as unstable, emotional, vindictive. I almost laughed. They already have. She paused, then nodded. Then let's show them you're not just a victim. You're a witness, and you're ready to speak. I filled out the forms with trembling hands. It felt surreal writing out in black ink the words I'd never said aloud. Physical assault by father-in-law Dorian Corwin witnessed by approximately 50 guests. Husband Alaric Corwin instructed me to apologize or leave. As I wrote, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time, like I was building my own armor piece by piece. After the paperwork, Marjorie leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. You should know, this isn't my first tangle with Dorian. I looked up. What? She gave a wry smile. Years ago, I represented a man who worked for him. Whistleblower case. Dorian crushed him, blacklisted him, ruined his career. But I kept the files, couldn't let it go. My breath caught. You still have them in a box labeled unfinished business. Looks like it finally found its ending. She pulled out a weathered folder, yellowed edges, and faded tabs. Inside were memos, email printouts, typed notes. One line stood out. He intimidates in private, but smiles in public. 2 faces. 1 empire. It was everything I needed and more. We spent hours reviewing strategy. Marjorie wasn't just helping me survive. She was preparing me to fight. When I left the clinic that day, snow was falling again. Not softly this time. Heavy, wet flakes that soaked through my boots as I walked. But I didn't care. I felt alive and angry and awake. I passed a bookstore and ducked inside for warmth. While there, I found a small leather journal with a gold clasp. I bought it without thinking. Back home, I wrote just one sentence on the first page. This ends with truth, not silence. Later that night, my phone buzzed. But it wasn't Alaric. It was a message from a former Corwin housekeeper, one who had always been kind to me in passing. Her text was brief. Be careful, he's building a case. Heard him say you were unstable. Wants to discredit you before you go public. My fingers tightened around the phone. So this was it. They weren't just warning me anymore. They were preparing to destroy me. I should have been terrified. But instead, I smiled, small, sharp. Let them try. I had something they didn't expect. A record, a witness, and a woman who was done being quiet. By the end of the week, I wasn't just preparing, I was hunting. My little apartment became a war room. Folders lined my coffee table, my notebook sat open next to my laptop, and sticky notes littered the walls with names, dates, quotes. Every time someone told me to stay quiet, I wrote it down. Every sideways look at those Corwin parties, every moment of humiliation repackaged as tradition. They thought I'd forget, that I'd move on, absorb the pain like I always had. They were wrong. I filed the restraining order. It was the first real action, a line drawn in legal ink, but I knew that wouldn't stop them. What came next was fast, too fast. Just 3 days later, before sunrise, I was jolted awake by a knock at the door. Not the casual kind, the kind that's sharp, deliberate. I opened it with hesitation, my pulse racing. A man in a long black overcoat stood holding an envelope. "Are you Calliope Corwin?" he asked, clipboard in hand. I froze. "Yes, you've been served." And just like that, he was gone. I stood in the hallway holding the envelope like it might explode, inside a formal lawsuit, defamation, libel, threats to the family's reputation. They were painting me as a dangerous, emotionally unstable woman with an agenda. The restraining order flipped against me. According to Dorian's lawyers, I had made repeated attempts to malign the Corwin name and was unfit to be around the family due to volatile behavior. It was like watching a stranger's story unfold, except it was mine. They were erasing me in real time. My phone buzzed. Alaric. Again. Against every instinct in my body, I picked up. His voice was calm. Too calm. "You brought this on yourself," he said before I even spoke. "We warned you. You should have let it go." "Let it go." "You mean your father hitting me?" I hissed. "Publicly, on your birthday." There was a pause. Then flatly, "I told you to apologize. You chose the other path." I hung up before he could finish. For a few minutes, I couldn't move. Then I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Marjorie. She didn't even flinch when I walked in holding the court documents. Her face darkened, but not with surprise. "Let me guess," she said, already reaching for her glasses. They flipped the story. "They called me unstable, said I've been aggressive for months. They got a former maid to testify I was emotionally volatile." Marjorie's mouth flattened into a hard line. They paid her off. It's textbook Dorian. Character assassination is the Corwin family's favorite sport. I slumped into the chair. They're trying to ruin me. Marjorie nodded slowly, fingers tapping the arm of her chair. "Because you're a threat, and powerful men only go to war with people they're scared of." That stuck. Scared. He was scared. The realization didn't feel like triumph, yet it felt like gasoline on kindling. She leaned across the desk. "Then it's time we make him sweat." The next few hours were a blur of legal language and fast typing. She filed a counter motion to dismiss the defamation suit and introduced a discovery request for any internal Corwin family communication that discussed me. It was bold, aggressive, but it shifted the momentum. Then she pulled something else from a locked drawer, a letter, typed, dated, signed, from a former Corwin business partner. "He gave me this 5 years ago," she said, "after Dorian ran him out of town. He told me to keep it in case anyone else ever needed it. The letter detailed fraudulent business practices, property manipulation, intimidation tactics. Nothing had come of it then, but now it was a pattern. I took a photo, emailed it to myself, backed it up twice. They'd called me unstable, vindictive, dangerous, but I had evidence and a story they couldn't script. That night, I returned home exhausted. My apartment felt darker than usual, the streetlight outside casting long shadows across the floor. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check my messages. I just sat at my desk, pulled out my notebook, and began writing again. But this time, not just what they'd done. I started mapping what I'd do next. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make them regret trying to destroy me. And I already knew where I'd hit them first. Their image. The Corwins had built their kingdom on image. Polished smiles, charity galas, magazine spreads showing them as the royal family of Boston's old money elite. Their entire empire wasn't just about wealth, it was about perception. And Dorian had always believed that perception was untouchable. He was wrong. The plan started in Marjorie's office a week before Christmas. We sat at her cluttered desk, the windows frosted from the storm outside, stacks of documents between us. She handed me back the file I'd been building for weeks, bank statements, internal memos, legal correspondence that should have stayed private, but hadn't. This, she said, tapping one page in particular. This transfer shows clear intent to hide assets, tied to his Beacon Hill property trust. It's shell work, probably to protect it from legal scrutiny. And it was filed 2 days before the birthday party I added, which makes the timing suspicious, especially if a reporter saw it. That's when it clicked. If they wanted silence, I'd give them something louder. I'd make sure everyone heard it. I drafted anonymous emails to investigative journalists, 5 of them, each one specializing in corporate fraud and Boston's high society corruption. I attached the documents labeled Key Incidents and included a simple line in each message. If you want to know what's really behind the Corwin name, start here. I scheduled them to go out at exactly 8:00 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Why? Because that was the night of Dorian's annual charity gala, his crowning event. Dozens of cameras, reporters, Boston's elite, all under one chandeliered roof. While he'd be on stage performing generosity, I'd expose his greed. The symbolism was intentional. That night, I dressed with care. Not in a gown, I had no invite, but in something sharper. A tailored black dress, minimal makeup, my hair pulled back. I wasn't there to dazzle. I was there to haunt. No one stopped me at the door. The Corwins were too prideful to put my name on the banned list. Publicly, they were pretending I didn't exist. That made it easier. Inside the ballroom glittered with opulence. Crystal glasses, ice sculptures, a string quartet in the corner playing something elegant and forgettable. I saw them Dorian Alaric, their orbit of admirers and puppets. They didn't see me. Not yet. I stood near the back, just close enough to hear the podium. Dorian stepped up, calm and smug, his voice oozing performative gratitude. We're honored to give back this season. The Corwin Foundation has always believed that those with more should do more. The hypocrisy tasted like iron. Then right on time it started. Phones began to buzz, one by one. At first, just glances at screens, then widened eyes, whispers, hands on shoulders. Then a journalist from the Globe stood up mid-speech and walked out fast. 2 others followed. Dorian paused. His smile faltered. He glanced down at his phone, froze. Then his voice cracked just slightly. This is slander. We will be taking legal action against any false accusations. He didn't finish, because at that moment 3 men in dark suits entered the ballroom. Not waitstaff, not guests, federal agents. They approached the podium with papers in hand. This is a subpoena for financial records related to the Corwin Foundation and its affiliated trusts. One of them said calmly but loudly enough for the crowd to hear. Cameras turned, phones lifted, and just like that, the man who once called me a stupid maid was stammering in front of Boston's elite. I didn't wait to see him unravel completely. I'd seen enough. As I turned to leave, someone grabbed my wrist. Alaric. His face was pale, his eyes wild. "What the hell did you do?" I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I just looked at him and said I watched the show. Now it's over. He didn't try to stop me as I walked out of that ballroom and into the winter night. Boston's cold never felt so clean. 2 days later, I met Marguerite in her office. She was already smiling before I sat down. "He's bleeding," she said, handing me a copy of the morning paper. "Federal audit. Donors pulling out. PR firm dropped him. The house of cards is wobbling. And the restraining order dismissed. Official, as of this morning." I exhaled for the first time in weeks, but the relief didn't come easy, because even as I won, I knew what it cost. My marriage was ashes. My name had been dragged, bruised, nearly broken. I'd spent weeks surviving on adrenaline vengeance and legal filings. Now all that was left was silence, and the pieces I had to rebuild. "You know," Marjorie said softly, "it's okay to grieve, even when you win." I nodded. I knew she was right. I'd burned the empire that once trapped me, but I still had to build a life from the scorched ground. The new apartment was small. 1 bedroom, creaky floors, windows that overlooked Boston Harbor like it owed me nothing but gave me everything. The silence here was different from the silence at the Corwin estate. This silence didn't judge me. It didn't press down like a weight or whisper insults into my ear. It just was. I sat on the edge of my bed the morning after the subpoena fallout, staring at the unopened boxes I hadn't bothered unpacking. My whole life reduced to cardboard and taped memories. I didn't even cry. There was nothing left to cry for. My phone lit up again. This time I didn't flinch. It wasn't Dorian, not a lawyer, not Alaric. It was Marjorie. One last meeting. Closure. When I got to her office, she was already waiting with a stack of printed reports in her hand. "Dorian's empire is imploding," she said, handing them to me. "Investigations are expanding. Financial assets frozen. He's hemorrhaging public trust faster than we expected. And you," she paused, eyes softening, "are free. Free." The word didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like breath returning to lungs I didn't know were starving. The restraining orders dismissed. The defamation suit was dropped this morning. No retraction, no apology, just silence. I nodded. It didn't matter anymore. Their silence meant surrender. I thanked her, truly thanked her. Not just for the legal work, but for listening when no one else did. For believing when even I wasn't sure I should. She smiled. "You found your voice, Colopy. I just reminded you what it sounded like." Later that week, Alaric asked to meet. I said yes, not because I needed it, but because I deserved the right to end this on my terms. We met at a quiet cafe near MIT, the kind of place we used to pretend to be normal in. He was already there, staring into a mug that had gone cold. When he saw me, he didn't stand. He looked smaller. Not in size, but in presence. "Colopy," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." I didn't speak. He continued. "I was scared. Of losing my job, of losing my father's trust, of losing everything I'd been building my whole life. I thought if I just stayed quiet, it would protect us both." "You didn't protect me," I said, voice level. "You watched me bleed and told me to apologize." He winced. "I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." There was a moment, a flicker, when the old ache came back. The part of me that still wanted to believe he was the man I married. But then I remembered the silence, the cold distance, the way he looked away while I stood humiliated and alone. "I'm not here to forgive you," I said gently. "I'm here to let you go." His lips parted like he wanted to argue. Instead, he nodded. "Can we ever rebuild?" I smiled, sad but steady. I'm done rebuilding things that were never safe for me to begin with. I left a few dollars on the table and walked out. Outside, the wind coming off the harbor was bitter, sharp, but clean. I walked until I reached the water, watching the ferries crawl across the steel gray surface, their engines humming like lullabies. Gulls circled above, screeching in the winter air. I remembered who I used to be, the woman who begged to be accepted, who played along, who made herself small at every dinner, who signed the papers, who swallowed the insults, who thought silence was strength. She died the night Dorian hit me. And in her place, someone else rose, someone who didn't ask to be let in, someone who learned that being cut out was sometimes the greatest gift. That night, back at my apartment, I lit a candle on the windowsill and sat by the glass, watching the lights blink across the harbor. My phone buzzed. A message from Marguerite. "You did it. They'll talk about this for years." I typed back one sentence. "Thank you for helping me burn it down." Then I set the phone down, wrapped myself in a blanket and closed my eyes. Not in exhaustion, but in peace. Because the ashes of their empire weren't my burden anymore. They were my freedom. Have you ever faced something like this? A moment where you had to choose your truth over someone else's silence? Drop your story below and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Someone out there needs to hear how you rose too.